Acts chapter 1 contains the text on which Ascension Sunday is based. In verses 10 and 11 of what Leah read for us this morning, we find the disciples presumably on a mountaintop after Jesus has ascended and been swept up into the clouds. They are standing there still gaping up into the sky when two divine messengers in white have to come along and prompt them. We certainly can't blame the disciples for standing there looking up into the clouds the way they were. For one thing, you and I would have done the same thing if we witnessed something so miraculous, something that none of us has ever seen before. I also imagine that the disciples probably feel pretty intimidated. How are we going to carry on now? How do we possibly continue the ministry that we have seen Jesus begin? What are we going to do at a time like this? And so these two divine messengers have to offer them a certain prompting. And in response to the prompting, they go back to the earlier part of chapter 1, where Jesus gave them some instructions. He's been with them for a period of 40 days after his resurrection. They have seen his body and the wounds in his hands, his feet, and his side. He has served them breakfast. He has broken bread and been recognized to them in the breaking of the bread. And he has taught and instructed them how everything that they have seen and experienced is an unfolding of what was foreseen in the Hebrew Scriptures, in the writings of the law and of the Psalms and of the prophets. And they ask him the question, Lord, is this the time that you are going to complete your work and we will see the fulfillment of the kingdom? And Jesus offers the warning. No one is to know the day and the hour that that is to occur, except my Father, which is in heaven. But the task that they are given to do is one that seems fairly simple. They're told to wait. But waiting in this case is not going to involve idleness. It involves at least three things that I'd like to highlight. First of all, in the section following what was read today, we're told that the disciples were constantly in prayer. They go back to Jerusalem, to the upper room, where they're awaiting the gift of the Spirit that is to come. And they're praying to God. I imagine them praying not just prayers that give over to God what's on their hearts and minds, their intimidation, their anxiousness, but also that they were spending times of silence, times to just listen for what God is saying, or to get accustomed to the fact that God is going to do something with them that they cannot fully anticipate. Oftentimes when you and I pray, it takes the form of sort of our list of demands that we're giving to God. But prayer also involves listening, sitting silently, to feel the presence of the Spirit and to feel God's direction on our lives. The second thing I imagine they did is continue the work that Jesus did of unfolding the Scriptures to them. These two strangers in white that are described here in the text from Acts chapter 1 can be interpreted in different ways. The painting that I talked about with the children this morning depicted these strangers as being angels with wings the way we're used to seeing them in classical artwork. But it's also possible others interpret this passage to see what's happening here in the beginning of Acts as being a reflection of what happens in the middle of Luke's gospel. There, at that point, Jesus goes up on top of a mountain, and he takes just 3 of his disciples with him. And there they see his clothes transform, and they become glowing white. And 2 people stand on either side of him. Moses, who represents the one whom God gave the law to, and Elijah, who represents the greatest of the prophets. 2 particular sections of the Hebrew Scriptures. It reflects the possibility that the disciples, and you and I by extension, are meant to see the work that we do through Christ as being an extension of what God did as testified to in your Hebrew Scriptures. That's the interpretation that's shown in the artwork that is on the cover of your bulletin, the photo that Emma chose for this morning. And the final thing that they might have done is come to the table for the breaking of bread and the sharing of the cup. Earlier in chapter 1, when it talks about Jesus gathering with them in a sort of open-ended way, the way the translation that was read for us today says, it just implies that he was meeting with them for instruction. But other translations translate it that when Jesus met with them for instruction prior to ascending into heaven, it says he met with them at the table, implying that he is gathering with them once again for the breaking of bread and the sharing of the cup. This time as a remembrance of what had happened, but also a promise for what is about to occur. I imagine that during those days prior to Pentecost, when the disciples met, that they prayed continually. They reflected on what they had been taught about the Scriptures. And they broke bread and they drank from the cup in remembrance and celebration of what had happened for them. Earlier in this passage, Jesus warns them that no one can know the day or the hour that he will return, although the strangers assured them that this will happen in the way they've just seen it. Despite that, for 1900 plus years, there are plenty of people who have tried to predict the exact day and time, and our time is no exception. Some people try to get around it by saying they don't know the exact moment, but they can kind of ballpark about when they think Jesus is going to return, despite the fact that for almost 2,000 years, all those that have falsely predicted Jesus was going to return are now dead and in the ground. That's a very audacious claim, because what someone does who tries to do that is that person claims to know more than the mind of our Heavenly Father. It's also, I believe, a profound waste of time for us and the resources that we have. I suggest that the better way for us to await Jesus' return is to do what the disciples did in Acts chapter 1, to continuously pray, to reflect on the Scriptures, and on this morning to come to the table for the gifts of bread and the cup, in celebration of the one who died, the one who raised, and the one who will come again. Amen.